So the last snippet that we have for this week is going to look at the Warren Court and race and gender. Decisions that have largely stood the test of time, although decisions that were quite controversial as well. So the most straightforward of these decisions deals with this hotel in downtown Atlanta called the Heart of Atlanta Motel, right in the middle of the urban core of Atlanta, whose owner was, it was basically a racist in the mid 1960s, who opposed the Civil Rights Act, which among Civil Rights Act of '64, which among other things made it illegal in most public accommodations to discriminate on the basis of race. So a hotel is a public accommodation; it's covered under the terms of the Civil Rights Act. So this motel now has to rent rooms to African Americans, and the owner doesn't want to do that. He's saying that he has a First Amendment freedom of association right to exclude Black people from his hotel if he wants to do so. And the court. So this is a frontal challenge to the Civil Rights Act of '64, and the court in Heart of Atlanta Motel says no. That it's true. The court says that Congress is trying to eradicate the moral scourge of discrimination, which, think back to what we looked at in the late 19th century with the civil rights cases. The court in that opinion said that, the 14th Amendment doesn't allow a kind of national code of morality. But the court also says that this is simply interstate commerce, which everyone agrees Congress has the authority to regulate. Congress has concluded that discrimination harms interstate commerce. So if you have a system where at any random hotel, if you're a Black person or if you're Asian or if you're Hispanic, the hotel can refuse to serve you, that might discourage you from engaging in tourism. Tourism is interstate commerce. So it's a kind of a circuitous route to justify an anti-discrimination approach. But in this manner, the court is able to avoid, sort of overturning a whole bunch of 19th century cases in the process. Probably the most ambitious of the Supreme Court's opinions on race was an outgrowth of the efforts of this man Byron Rumford, who was a California assemblyman who passed a law called the Rumford Act, which was an open housing law. So this was a law that that made illegal discrimination in the sale or rental of private homes. This generated a ferocious backlash in California from people who seem to prefer not to live around African American people, but also by the real estate industry in California that worried about lawsuits as a result of this. It was a well-financed opposition, and California, remember, had this thing called the initiative and the referendum that we looked at in the progressive era. So it allowed for popular votes to overturn state legislation. And opponents of the Rumford Act get a measure on the ballot of California called Proposition 14, which invalidates the law. And the measure passes in 1964 in a year where LBJ just sweeps the state. And you can kind of see from this chart, LBJ is opposed by a very conservative Republican named Barry Goldwater, who does not do particularly well in California. So Goldwater's share of 4 House districts in California, you see in the blue items here. So this district outside Oakland, it gets 34%. Santa Barbara, which is a Southern California area right on the coast, 42%. And LA County House District, Goldwater gets 41%. And even in the Watts area of Los Angeles, Goldwater only gets 8%. The red bars on this are the percentage of people who voted in favor of Proposition 14 in these very same House districts. So what this chart shows is there were lots and lots and lots of Californians who voted for Lyndon Johnson, who was a strong supporter of the Civil Rights Act, who ran on a platform of racial egalitarianism, but who in their own minds did not see opposing open housing as something that was incompatible with an anti-racist philosophy. So Proposition 14 is challenged in the courts on grounds that it's an example of racial discrimination, that you had this law that was designed to help African American people, and then it was cast aside in a popular vote. And the Supreme Court, the Warren Court, in a 5-4 decision called Reitman versus Mulkey, strikes down Proposition 14 and basically says that it's true that you can't argue that every single voter in California was a racist, who voted for this. So you can't argue that it was a racially discriminatory law in that respect. And it's true, the court concedes, that there might be some non-racially, non-discriminatory aspects of the law. But the court says that there's a necessity to assess the potential, not the impact, even the impact, but just the potential impact of official action in determining whether the state has significantly involved itself with invidious discriminations. And here the court concludes that this is what Proposition 14 will do. So it strikes down Proposition 14, which reestablishes the Rumford Act. This is an opinion which is not cited frequently thereafter, and this is about as a lot of times you'll see a conservative critique of the courts, of liberalism in the court, as results oriented, and Reitman was pretty close to a results oriented opinion. But it's in this respect, it's the outer edge of Warren Court opinion of racial justice opinions. There's also gender issues that come before the court in the 1960s. The most significant is an opinion from this man, Justice William O. Douglas, who was a Roosevelt FDR nominee, who's still on the court in the 60s. The case is called Griswold versus Connecticut, and this is an opinion which strikes down a Connecticut law that banned the sale of contraceptive devices. This is kind of a legacy of Puritanism in Connecticut. This was a very silly law. The question was, how does this law actually violate the Constitution? And Justice Douglas, in his opinion, discovers guarantees in the Bill of Rights that have penumbras formed by emanations from those guarantees that help give them life and substance. Various guarantees, he writes, create zones of privacy. I would not recommend this intellectual style for your final exams. Again, this does kind of seem results oriented, but it's a critical decision. Establishes a constitutional right to privacy that will be used on a variety of gender cases, will be used in a variety of sexual orientation cases down the road. And this is a protester against the Planned Parenthood efforts, making a case that morality is essentially on trial in the Griswold case. And then the last of the opinions we're going to be looking at this week, which kind of brings together race and gender and popular opposition to racial egalitarianism, deals with the issue of interracial marriage, which was, I think it's always a flashpoint. We started these Jim Crow state constitutions, but as recently as 1947, interracial marriage was illegal in 30 states. All of the states that are here in red banned a black person from marrying a white person. Some of these bans were constitutional bans, mostly in the South. Most of the other bans were statutory bans, that is, that they opposed. By 1966, it's only 17 states, all in the Deep South, that there is no that still ban interracial marriage. But almost all of these bans are constitutional bans, and it's clear that they're going nowhere. Interracial marriage is at this point extremely unpopular. This is a remarkable chart. This is from Gallup. It's not until the late 90s that a majority of Americans say that they approve of marriage between black people and white people. And in the mid 60s, the number is only in the teens who say that they approve of this. So this is, in terms of civil rights issues, this is probably the most unpopular civil rights area during this time. The case that works its way to the Supreme Court is this wonderfully named case called Loving versus Virginia, named for this couple, Richard and Mildred Loving, who are from Virginia, who marry in the District of Columbia, and by so doing violate the Virginia criminal statute for interracial marriage. carried a 5-year prison sentence for a black person to marry a white person. And this makes its way to the Supreme Court in 1967, a case called Loving versus Virginia, and a 9-0 decision, the court strikes down Virginia's law. And there are a couple of important parts of this law. The first is that it's an opinion that establishes marriage as a basic civil right, so a fundamental right. And second, it says that this is the ban, obviously is based on invidious racial discrimination, and there's no justification for supporting it. So Loving is an opinion now which is extremely popular. A lot of these other Warren Court decisions generate more resistance. And next week or the week after, Spring Break, we'll be looking at the most politically controversial of the Warren Court decisions that deal with the question of crime. So that's all we have for snippets for